Everyone believed the billionaire's baby had been born blind. The doctors confirmed it, specialists gave up, and even his own father lost hope. For months, the child lived in silence, never reacting, never smiling, never seeing. But then, a new maid was hired. She had no medical training. She wasn't part of any team. She was just there to clean and help around the house. But what she noticed changed everything. One small moment, during a simple bath, revealed a truth that no one else had seen. And from that day on, nothing was ever the same again. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. After the helicopter crash that killed his wife, Andrew Whitmore shut himself inside his massive mansion. He didn't want to see anyone. He didn't want to talk to anyone. The only thing that mattered to him now was his baby boy, Eli. But Eli had been born blind. The doctors told Andrew that the baby's eyes didn't respond to light at all. It was a crushing diagnosis. Since then, Andrew has done everything he can to take care of him. He feeds him, bathes him, holds him. He never hires a nanny. He never leaves the house. His whole life is wrapped around the child. But Eli just sits quietly. He doesn't cry, doesn't laugh. His little face always looks blank. His eyes stare off into nothing. It's like the baby doesn't even know anyone is there. Andrew has no idea what to do. He fills the room with colorful toys, hoping something will catch his attention, but Eli never reacts. He just stays still and silent. Every morning, Andrew picks Eli up from his crib and tries again. He opens the curtains to let the sunlight in. He talks to the boy softly while changing his diaper. He shakes a rattle near Eli's face, hoping to get a smile or even a blink, but the baby never responds. His head tilts slightly, but there's no emotion. Andrew starts to think maybe Eli can't hear either, but the doctor said his hearing was fine, so why doesn't he react? Andrew plays soft music in the background, hoping a melody might reach him. He even tries different languages, different voices. Nothing works. Eli just sits or lies down quietly, eyes wide but empty, like he's trapped inside himself. Andrew doesn't know if Eli even knows who he is. Does he know he's being held? Does he feel the warmth of a hug? These questions repeat in Andrew's mind constantly. He gets no answers, just more silence. The mansion, once a place of life and laughter, now feels like a shell. Every corner reminds Andrew of what he lost. The echo of his footsteps on the polished floors is the only sound most days. The baby monitor is always quiet. No crying, no babbling. Just silence. Andrew walks past rooms that are perfectly clean and untouched. The living room is full of toys, stuffed animals, blocks, musical mobiles. None of them are ever used. The nursery is decorated with bright colors and cartoon animals, but it feels fake, lifeless. The baby doesn't look at anything. He never reaches for anything. It's like he's not even curious. Andrew sits for hours just watching Eli, trying to catch even a flicker of response. A twitch, a smile, a tear. But nothing comes. Every night, he carries him upstairs, bathes him gently and reads stories aloud. Even though Eli shows no reaction, Andrew keeps doing it. It's the only thing he can do. Andrew's grief over his wife's death mixes with frustration about Eli's condition. He never expected to raise a child alone. And now, with a baby that doesn't respond to the world, it's even harder. He sometimes feels like he's failing. He wonders if he's doing something wrong. Maybe he missed a step. Maybe there's something he forgot to try. He searches online late into the night. He orders new toys, new lights, sound machines, anything that might stimulate Eli. But when they arrive, they make no difference. Eli never reacts. Andrew spends hours talking to specialists, both in person and by video calls. He listens, takes notes, follows instructions exactly. Some suggest more physical therapy, others suggest sensory play. But Eli never changes. The therapists say to give it time, but Andrew's patience is wearing thin. Not because he doesn't love his son, but because he feels powerless. He wants to connect with him. He wants to see a sign, just one, that his son knows he's there. Andrew used to be known for his strong personality in the business world. He was confident, assertive, always in control. But now, he's just a man alone with his baby, trying to find a way through the dark. His days are scheduled around Eli, but the routine never brings change. He wakes up, feeds him, changes him, tries to play. Nothing happens. The same thing again and again. Some days he cries silently while holding Eli. Other days he feels numb. There are moments when he doubts everything. He wonders if Eli feels pain, if he feels love, if he's aware of anything at all. Andrew sometimes speaks to his wife's picture, asking her what he's supposed to do. He looks at old videos of her holding the newborn, smiling, full of hope. That hope is gone now. The silence in the house is not just from Eli. It's also inside Andrew. A silence full of unanswered questions, fear, and the feeling that he is losing himself too. One night, after another long and quiet day, Andrew stood by Eli's crib, watching him sleep. The baby's small chest rose and fell slowly. His hands were curled by his sides. His eyes, half open, stared at nothing. Andrew leaned on the crib railing, exhausted. He had tried everything: specialists, therapy, music, light machines, toys with sounds. Nothing worked. The same questions came back to him like they did every night. Does Eli feel anything? Does he even know I'm here? Andrew looked around the room, filled with untouched toys, and felt a deep sadness settle into his chest. The walls, once painted with cheerful colors, now felt like a cruel joke. He ran his hand through his hair and sighed. Then he turned off the light, leaving only the soft glow of a night lamp. He sat in the rocking chair beside the crib, staring at the boy. In that moment, the house felt like a museum of grief, and Andrew had no idea if that would ever change. On her first morning at the mansion, Valerie arrived early. A driver had picked her up from the bus station and brought her to the large iron gates. She stood quietly as they opened, revealing a massive white mansion surrounded by trimmed hedges and a clean stone driveway. The driver didn't speak much, and neither did she. Valerie stepped out of the car with a small bag in one hand and a folded letter in the other. It was her job contract, signed a week ago. She was hired to clean, organize, and help maintain order in the house. Nothing more. But she already sensed there was more behind this place. As she walked through the front door, the silence hit her hard. The house was too quiet for a place so big. No music, no voices, no signs of life. A tall man in a black suit, maybe the butler, greeted her without a smile and gave her a quick tour of the first floor. No warmth, just rooms, duties, and rules. Valerie followed the man from room to room. He showed her the kitchen, the laundry area, the dining room, and the guest spaces. Everything was spotless. It was strange. Nothing seemed used. The house felt like a museum. Polished floors, shiny windows, untouched decorations. As they moved, the man pointed to a schedule on a wall near the kitchen. "Mr. Whitmore prefers routines," he said. Valerie nodded. She was used to rich people with strict habits, but even so, something about this place felt unusual. They passed by a room with toys scattered on the floor. It looked like a playroom, but there were no sounds coming from inside, just silence. Valerie stopped for a moment to look, but the man kept walking. She hurried to catch up. Upstairs, she was shown a small room that would be hers. Simple, clean, with a bed, a small closet, and a window. That was enough for her. She had come here to work and to stay busy. She had her reasons. Valerie didn't talk about her past. Nobody here asked, and she didn't offer. But inside, she carried a quiet sadness that never left. A few months earlier, her newborn son had died. The doctors didn't know why. One night he was crying in her arms, and the next morning he was gone. No warning. No explanation. Since then, her life had fallen apart. She left her job, her apartment, and cut ties with almost everyone she knew. She didn't want to answer questions or hear people say they were sorry. When she saw the job listing for a live-in housemaid in a distant area, she applied right away. It felt like a way out, a chance to disappear. She didn't care about the salary or the name of the man who hired her. She just needed something new. Now, as she unpacked her few things in the quiet bedroom, she tried not to think too much. She had made a choice to be here. That had to be enough. After lunch, Valerie was assigned light cleaning duties on the ground floor. She started in the living room, dusting furniture and folding some blankets. There were baby toys everywhere. A small red ball, a stuffed bear, some plastic blocks. She picked them up and placed them neatly in a basket. Then from the corner of her eye, she saw someone. Across the room, sitting on a beige playmat, was a baby. He didn't move. He just sat there, holding a toy car in one hand. His eyes were wide open, but unfocused. His body was still, too still for a baby that age. Valerie froze. She had worked with children before. Even sad or quiet babies fidgeted or made noise. This boy didn't. She stayed quiet and kept watching. No one else was around. The baby didn't notice her presence at all. She looked at his little hands, at his blank face, and felt a strange feeling in her chest. Something was wrong. This child wasn't just blind. He seemed lost inside himself. The butler returned and noticed Valerie staring. "That's Eli," he said flatly. "Mr. Whitmore's son. Don't try to play with him. He doesn't respond." Valerie nodded without asking anything. The man left again. She stood still for a moment longer, then slowly returned to her work, but her eyes kept drifting back to the boy. Eli hadn't moved once. The toy in his hand hung loosely, like he had forgotten he was holding it. Valerie cleaned a nearby shelf, wiping gently, but her attention was on the child the entire time. She couldn't explain it, but the baby pulled her in. Not in a sweet or joyful way. It was deeper than that. Maybe it was the silence, or the way he looked like he wasn't really here. She finished her cleaning, but her steps were slower now. She walked past Eli once more and looked down. Still no reaction, no blink, no change. Valerie left the room quietly. Something in her had changed. She couldn't stop thinking about that boy. That night, Valerie lay on her bed staring at the ceiling. She could still see Eli's face in her mind, calm, blank, disconnected. She had seen children with problems before, but this was something else. The way he just sat there, not seeing, not hearing, not reacting. It reminded her of something she didn't want to remember. Her own baby, during those last few hours, had looked like that. Valerie turned to her side and pulled the blanket up. She wasn't going to cry. She had already cried too much. But now, something was stirring inside her. She didn't come here to get involved. She came to work, to clean, to stay quiet. But now she found herself wondering about this baby. Why was he like that? What had happened to him? Why did it feel like no one else cared? She didn't have answers, but for some reason, she felt drawn to him. Something about him wouldn't let go. And even though she didn't understand it yet, Valerie couldn't stop thinking about him. One morning, Valerie walked into the main living room like she always did. The house was quiet, the way it always was. She picked up Eli from the playmat where he sat quietly, holding a soft stuffed animal in one hand. He didn't look at her, didn't move, didn't react in any way. His little body remained limp, his eyes open, but not focused. She gently cradled him in her arms and walked toward the dining room, where a large glass table had been converted into a bathing station. A round plastic basin filled with warm water was already there. Valerie had prepared everything earlier. Clean towels, baby soap, a soft sponge. She had done this routine several times now. Eli never reacted to the bath, never showed discomfort or pleasure. She simply followed each step carefully. As she unbuttoned his onesie and undressed him, she noticed a small red mark on his leg, just a pressure spot from how he had been lying. She made a mental note to reposition him more often. Valerie slowly lowered Eli into the warm, soapy water. She held him carefully, making sure his head was supported. The water level reached just below his shoulders, and tiny white foam bubbles began to form around his chest and arms. He didn't flinch. His face stayed blank, eyes open, not looking anywhere. Valerie reached for the sponge and began washing his arms and belly in slow, gentle circles. The foam clung to his soft skin. She worked in silence. Her movements were precise, as they always were, but inside she was thinking. She kept remembering the way he looked yesterday, sitting still in the living room, not reacting to anything. Today felt the same, until she moved the sponge toward his face. She dipped it in warm water, squeezed it, then gently wiped it across his forehead. Some of the foam slipped down and touched the outer corner of his eye. That's when it happened. Eli blinked. It was quick and soft, not startled, just a blink. Valerie's hand froze in midair. Her eyes locked on his face. She stayed completely still. Eli didn't make another movement, but she had seen it clearly. A blink, not caused by discomfort, not by light. Just a blink when the foam touched his skin. Valerie waited a few seconds, then repeated the action. She dabbed the other side of his forehead, just above his eyebrow. Again, some foam slid near the opposite eye. Eli blinked again, then unexpectedly a small sound came from his throat. It was quiet, almost like a breath, but there was sound. Valerie leaned in slightly, watching him closely. His mouth had moved, his lips parted slightly. She wasn't imagining it. This was real. Her heart started beating faster. Eli stayed still again, but something about him had changed. Valerie noticed it in the way his eyes shifted, just a small, almost invisible motion, like his gaze had adjusted slightly. Not fully looking at her, but not fully empty either. For a moment it felt like he was present. She didn't say anything. She didn't want to ruin the moment by speaking. Instead, she gently continued the bath. She rinsed his arms, lifted each one to wash under them, and used the sponge on his neck and chest. The bubbles made soft popping sounds as they moved in the basin. Eli didn't blink again, and he didn't make another sound, but Valerie could still feel the change. She looked for signs, a twitch of his fingers, a turn of his head, but everything was still. Still, the moment had happened. She kept replaying it in her mind as she washed behind his ears and the back of his head. Eli's skin was warm. His body relaxed as usual, but now something about it felt less absent, like he wasn't completely cut off. She rinsed the soap from his hair, being extra careful not to let anything drip into his eyes. After she was done, she lifted him from the water and wrapped him in a soft towel. He let out a small exhale. She carried him gently to the nearby armchair, where she always dried him off and dressed him. Valerie placed him on her lap, patting him dry in small sections. His head rested against her arm. She whispered nothing, just kept quiet, watching him with alert eyes. Every now and then, she glanced at his face, hoping to see that same blink again or hear another tiny sound. But Eli had gone back to his usual blank expression. Still, it wasn't the same as before. Valerie couldn't explain it in words, but she felt it in her chest. There was no way this was random. The blink, the sound, and that small shift in gaze. They were all part of something, maybe small, maybe early, but not meaningless. Valerie dressed him in a clean white onesie with blue stripes and put socks on his feet. She picked him up again and sat for a few extra minutes, holding him close. His head rested against her shoulder, warm and quiet as usual. But now she felt something else. She carried him back to the living room and placed him gently on the playmat. The toys were still in the same position from earlier. She placed the stuffed animal in his hand and adjusted the blanket under him. Then she stood up and just watched him. His eyes stayed open, staring into space. But Valerie's own eyes didn't blink either. She stayed there for several minutes, frozen in thought. This baby wasn't just silent, he was locked away. And for the first time, something had reached him, something as simple as soap foam and a gentle wipe. She wondered if it had been touch, temperature, texture, or some reaction to movement. She didn't know, but she felt it deeply. It was real. Her hands trembled slightly as she cleaned up the bath station. Her thoughts wouldn't stop spinning. Could this be the beginning of something? Could there be a way to reach him after all? Valerie didn't have answers, but one thing was clear. The baby had responded, and it wasn't random. The next morning, Valerie prepared the bath for Eli again. She tried not to overthink what had happened the day before, but it was impossible to ignore. Something inside her had shifted. Today she followed the same steps, same warm water, same soft sponge, same gentle baby soap. She placed the plastic basin on the glass table, filled it slowly, and tested the temperature with her wrist. Everything was quiet in the house, as always. Andrew was upstairs in his office, and no one else was around. Valerie walked to the living room, picked up Eli, and cradled him close to her chest. He didn't move, just stared forward with his usual blank expression. But her heart beat faster with every step she took back to the bathing area. She undressed him slowly, carefully unbuttoning his onesie and pulling off his socks. When she lowered him into the basin, he stayed calm. His body floated slightly in the warm water. Valerie sat on the small stool beside the table and began the bath. She started by washing his arms and shoulders, just like before. Her movements were slow, gentle, and steady. Eli didn't respond at first, which made her second-guess everything she had seen the day before. But then she reached for the sponge, soaked it again, and began wiping his forehead with light circular motions. The foam slowly gathered near the sides of his eyes. She watched closely. Then, just like before, he blinked. It was soft and calm, not startled. She paused. Her hands were shaking slightly. She let more foam slide gently across the bridge of his nose. That's when he opened his mouth. "Mo!" he said. The sound came from deep in his throat, broken and soft. Valerie dropped the sponge into the water and stared at him, her mouth open, heart racing. "Mo, Mommy," he said again slowly. The word was messy, like a baby learning to speak for the first time. But it was there. The sound was clear enough to make Valerie freeze completely. She didn't move. She barely breathed. She looked at his face. Eli's eyes were open wider now. They weren't fully focused, but they weren't empty either. There was something different about them, something more awake. Then he reached out. His tiny wet hand lifted slowly from the water, trembling slightly. Valerie didn't speak. She stayed still as his fingers moved toward her. He brushed her cheek, barely touching it, but she felt the warmth of his skin. Her breath caught in her throat. He was reaching for her. Eli, the baby who never moved, who never reacted, who never cried. He had lifted his hand. Valerie didn't know what to say or do. She wanted to cry, but she held her emotions back. Eli let his hand fall back into the water and then looked at her hand. Valerie slowly moved it to the left, and he followed it with his eyes. Then to the right, and again he followed. The movement was small, but it was clear. He was seeing something. He was trying to connect. Valerie's mind was racing. This couldn't be random. It wasn't a muscle twitch. It wasn't noise. It was a word. She repeated the moment in her head. The blink, the sound, the word mommy, the touch, the eye movement. It had all happened in less than a minute. She continued bathing him slowly, trying to act normal. Her hands were steady again, but her heart was still pounding. She rinsed his chest, arms and head, making sure the foam didn't go into his eyes. Eli stayed calm, watching her face, blinking every so often. She wasn't sure if he understood what he was saying. Maybe he had heard the word before from someone else, maybe from his real mother. But he had said it while looking at her. That word didn't come from nowhere. It had weight, meaning. She gently poured clean water down his back, her hands moving with care. The baby didn't speak again, but his silence now felt different. He wasn't empty. He was processing something. She could feel it. After drying him with a soft towel, Valerie dressed Eli in clean clothes. He didn't fight the movements like some babies do. He let her guide his arms through the sleeves and pull the socks onto his feet. She sat with him for a while, holding him in her lap, her eyes fixed on his. He looked toward her again, his head slightly tilted. She moved her fingers slowly, and he watched. There was no big reaction, no laugh, no smile, but there was presence. He was here. Valerie whispered softly, just to test. "Eli," she said, "can you hear me?" No answer, but his eyes blinked once, calm. She didn't push. She didn't try again. Something had changed, and that was enough for now. She sat for several more minutes, breathing slowly, calming herself. She ran a hand over the back of his head gently. She had no answers, no explanation, but what happened couldn't be ignored. Eli had spoken, and not just any word. He had said something that came from deep inside him. As she cleaned up the bath supplies, her hands were quiet, but her mind was loud. That word repeated again and again. Mommy. Not just a sound, but a message. Valerie knew it wasn't meant for her, not directly. It was probably the only word he had held inside since birth. Maybe he heard it in the past, and now, somehow, it had come out. But he had said it to her, looking at her, reaching for her. Something in him had responded to something in her, something that touched a memory or a need. Valerie didn't know how far this would go. She didn't know if this was the beginning of healing or just a rare moment. But it was real. It wasn't in her head. The blink, the movement, the word, it all happened. She glanced over at Eli, now lying calmly on the playmat. He looked peaceful. Still quiet, but no longer distant. She sat beside him and stayed close, watching. "Mommy," he had said, and she would never forget it. Over the next few days, Valerie kept the bath routine exactly the same. Every morning, she filled the round glass basin with warm water, added a few drops of baby soap, and gently mixed it until foam started to form. Eli would sit quietly in her arms just as before. But now, Valerie watched him differently. She wasn't only bathing him, she was studying him. She moved her hands slowly in front of his face, not touching, just passing through the air to see if his eyes would react. Sometimes they did. He would blink or make a small sound, like a soft It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep her attention sharp. Each small movement felt like a clue. When she opened the curtains a little more than usual, letting in more daylight, Eli squinted. That was new. Valerie pretended it was an accident, but inside, her heart started to race. Something real was happening. These were not random movements anymore. Each day, Valerie became more careful and more deliberate. She began testing little things, shifting the light, changing the angle of her hand, letting soap bubbles drift near his eyes again. She tried not to let the others notice. If anyone asked, she said she was just following the cleaning schedule, but privately, she kept observing Eli's face closely. One morning, when she moved the washcloth slowly from left to right, his eyes followed it. Not just once, twice. Valerie froze, barely breathing. That small, simple motion confirmed what she already suspected. Eli could see something, maybe not clearly, but something. She smiled without meaning to, feeling both thrilled and scared. She wanted to tell someone, but who would believe her? Everyone in the house treated Eli like a lost case. The doctor's report said permanent blindness. The staff spoke about him in whispers, as if he couldn't hear or understand. Valerie decided to keep this discovery to herself, at least for now. Over the next few nights, Valerie couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the moments in her mind, the blinking, the sound, the movement of his eyes. She wrote notes secretly on a piece of paper she hid under her mattress, marking each small reaction. Every morning, she found herself both nervous and excited to continue. But as she worked, she started to notice something strange. Every afternoon before lunch, one of the staff members, usually the butler or a nurse, would stop by Eli's room with a small bottle. They would apply eye drops to him. Valerie thought it was part of a medical routine and didn't question it at first. But one day, curiosity took over. When the others left the room, she picked up the small bottle from the side table. The label was faded and hard to read. The print was old, the edges worn. She brought it closer to the light and tried to make out the words. The expiration date had passed months ago. Valerie frowned. The prescription sticker said, "For optic treatment," but the details were almost impossible to read. She put it back quickly, afraid someone would notice. But the thought stuck with her the entire day. Later that night, after everyone had gone to sleep, she searched the name of the medicine on her phone. It took her a while to find it, because the label was partially rubbed off. Finally, she matched the partial words to a real drug, one known to reduce sensitivity to light. It was meant for people who had painful light exposure, not for babies who needed stimulation. Valerie sat in bed staring at the screen, her hands shaking slightly. The drug's side effects included blurry vision, slower pupil reaction, and reduced ability to detect brightness. Her mind began connecting the pieces. What if Eli wasn't blind at all? What if these drops were blocking his eyes from responding properly? The idea felt too heavy to accept, but she couldn't ignore it. The next morning, she watched closely as the butler came again with the small bottle. He was calm, almost robotic, dropping 1 or 2 drops into each of Eli's eyes. Eli didn't cry or move, just sat still like always. Valerie forced herself to stay quiet, pretending she didn't care, but inside she felt angry. Her chest tightened as she wondered why they kept giving this to him. She wanted to ask Andrew, but that wasn't her place. Her job was to clean, to take care of the baby, not to question medical orders. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about it. If the medicine was old, maybe it wasn't even helping. Or worse, maybe it was the reason Eli never reacted before. That thought made her stomach twist. She remembered the first day she bathed him, how lifeless he seemed. What if that wasn't his conditions? What if it was the result of what they were doing to him? Every small reaction she had seen lately might have happened only because the drops were wearing off. Valerie knew she couldn't confront anyone yet. She needed to be sure. She started paying attention to the timing. After each dose, Eli seemed duller, slower, more still. But as the hours passed, or by the next morning, his reactions grew slightly stronger again. It couldn't be a coincidence. She felt torn between fear and determination. If she was right, someone in this house was making Eli worse, not better. And for what reason? Was it negligence or something else? Valerie didn't know, but she was certain of one thing. Something had been wrong all along. She looked at Eli lying on the playmat later that afternoon, holding his favorite stuffed animal. He blinked slowly, his eyes catching the faint light from the window. Valerie's chest tightened. For the first time, she saw hope in those eyes, not emptiness. She whispered softly, almost afraid to say it out loud. "You can see, can't you?" Eli didn't answer, but she didn't need him to. She already believed. It was late afternoon. The house was quiet, with just the soft sound of water coming from the dining room where the glass table had once again been turned into a bath station. Valerie was kneeling beside it, carefully supporting Eli in the warm, soapy water. The foam floated around his chest and shoulders. The baby looked calm, even content. She moved slowly, making sure not to rush. This wasn't just a bath anymore. It was the only time each day she saw real signs of Eli waking up to the world. She dipped the sponge into the basin again, gently squeezed it and moved it up to his face. She let some foam roll toward his eyes, exactly as she'd done in the previous days. Eli blinked. Then, after a few seconds, something more. His lips moved slightly. "Mo," he said. Valerie's hand froze in place. Mo, Mommy," Eli said again, louder this time. Valerie stared at him, her eyes wide, her chest tightening. This time, it wasn't faint. It was clear. Before she could react, they both heard the sharp creak of the front door opening. Valerie turned her head quickly. Andrew had just stepped into the living room. He was holding his phone in one hand and a coat folded over the other arm. He stopped in his tracks the second he saw the scene. His eyes locked on the table, the sponge in Valerie's hand, the baby sitting upright in the basin, foam covering his small body, and then the word, "Mommy." Andrew's face changed instantly. His brows lowered and his mouth tightened. "What's going on here?" he asked, walking forward quickly. His voice wasn't angry, but there was tension. Valerie stood frozen, her hands still wet. She opened her mouth to explain, but nothing came out right away. She didn't expect to be caught. Not like this, not during a moment that felt so personal, so fragile. But then, before either of them could say another word, Eli did something no one expected. The baby turned his head toward the voice. Slowly, but clearly. He looked at Andrew, not just in his direction, but directly at him. His little eyes were focused. He wasn't staring into space, wasn't looking through him. He was truly seeing. Andrew stopped walking. He stood still in the middle of the room, staring back at his son. His lips moved slightly, but he didn't speak yet. Valerie glanced at Andrew, then back at Eli, trying to process what was happening. Then she whispered, barely able to speak. "He saw the foam," she said, "and he called me Mommy." Her voice shook slightly. Andrew looked at her, then looked at his son again. "Eli," he said, not loud, almost in disbelief. The baby smiled, a small smile, but a real one. Valerie felt her whole body tense. She wanted to cry, scream, run, explain everything, but she stayed quiet. The moment was too big, too real. She waited, watching both father and son stare at each other for the first time. Andrew took one slow step forward. His eyes didn't leave Eli's face. "Eli," he repeated, this time a little louder. The baby blinked, then moved one hand toward the foam, splashing it gently. Valerie noticed the movement. It wasn't random, it wasn't clumsy. Eli was interacting, reacting. Andrew crouched down beside the table, not caring about his expensive clothes or the water on the floor. He leaned in just slightly, studying his son's face. "You're looking at me?" he said quietly, almost afraid to believe it. Eli's mouth opened again. Mommy, he said once more, still looking at Andrew. Valerie stepped back slightly. Her hands were shaking. Andrew didn't seem angry anymore. He seemed lost. He looked between Valerie and the baby. "How long has this been happening?" he asked. Valerie hesitated. "Just a few days," she said. "I wasn't sure. I didn't want to say anything until—" She trailed off, motioning toward the scene in front of them. Andrew didn't speak. His hand gently touched the edge of the table. A long pause filled the room. Eli shifted again in the water and blinked slowly. His eyes were still on Andrew. There was no question anymore. The baby could see something. Andrew was breathing deeply, as if trying to stay calm, trying to control his emotions. He looked down at the floor, then back up at Valerie. He said, "Mommy," he asked again, just to be sure he'd heard it right. Valerie nodded. "Twice before you walked in. Then once more now." Andrew swallowed hard. His eyes were glassy now. But why? Why now? He never He never responded before. Valerie didn't answer right away. Her mind jumped to the eye drops, the prescriptions, the reactions. But this wasn't the time to bring that up. Not yet. She just said, "Something changed. I don't know how or why." "But it started during the baths." Andrew reached out carefully and touched Eli's shoulder. The baby blinked again, but didn't pull away. Andrew let out a slow breath. "He's looking at me," he whispered. "He's really looking at me." Valerie picked up the towel and gently lifted Eli from the basin, wrapping him in the soft fabric. His body was relaxed, not stiff like before. Andrew stood up slowly, still watching. Valerie held the baby close, drying his head with one hand while supporting him with the other. Eli looked up again, eyes moving, following the motion of her hand. Andrew was still standing there, stunned. Valerie walked a little closer and lowered her voice. "This is real," she said. "It's not imagination. He sees the foam. He sees hands. He reacts. He's different now." Andrew nodded slowly, still looking dazed. "I don't understand it," he said. "I spent months trying everything, and now—" He looked at his son, then back at Valerie. He smiled at me. Valerie didn't respond. She didn't need to. They both understood. Eli had changed. Something had broken through. As they stood there, surrounded by bathwater and foam, Andrew stared at his son, and for the first time in his life, felt him looking back. That night, after Eli was asleep and the house had settled into its usual quiet, Valerie stood outside Andrew's office door. She had thought about this moment all day, unsure how to begin. With a deep breath, she knocked gently. Andrew opened the door, still in the same clothes from earlier, but now looking more tired, more confused. She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. "I need to talk to you," she said. He nodded slowly and sat on the edge of the sofa, motioning for her to continue. Valerie didn't hold back. She told him everything, from the first blink in the bath to the mommy moment, to Eli tracking her hand with his eyes. Andrew listened without interrupting. His face showed disbelief at first, but he didn't stop her. Then she told him about the eye drops, about the staff applying them daily, about how she found the bottle and how the label was too faded to read clearly. She said the words carefully. "I think the drops are the problem." "The drops? But those were prescribed after his diagnosis," he said, standing up and walking over to a drawer near his desk. He opened it and began digging through papers, folders, and medical files. He pulled out a small box labeled Eli's Records and placed it on the table. Valerie came closer as he opened it. Inside were old prescriptions, appointment summaries, and doctor's notes. Andrew pulled out a few papers and read them quickly. "Here," he said, handing her one of the prescriptions. The name of the doctor was printed at the top, Dr. Raymond Kelser. "He handled most of Eli's early care. I trusted him completely," Andrew added. Valerie typed the name into her phone and searched for more information. After a few minutes of scrolling, her expression changed. "Andrew, this doctor had his license revoked last year." She turned the screen toward him. The article described a series of investigations into unethical treatments, particularly involving medications given to infants. Andrew stared at the screen, his hands starting to shake. He sat back down slowly, eyes still locked on the phone. "I had no idea," he said quietly. "He came highly recommended. I never thought to check anything after the diagnosis." Valerie gently placed the worn eye drop bottle on the table. "This is the same medicine the staff still uses," she said. Andrew picked it up, studying the faded label. "These don't look like the ones I approved," he muttered. Valerie explained what she found in her research, that the ingredients were known to suppress pupil reaction and reduce sensitivity to light. "They're not meant for long-term use in babies," she added. Andrew looked shocked. "Are you saying he could see that we were making it worse with this?" Valerie nodded carefully. "I think the drops were keeping him from reacting. Once they wore off, We started to see small changes, like today, like yesterday. Andrew didn't speak for a moment. He looked over at Eli's baby monitor on the desk. The screen showed him sleeping peacefully. Then, without hesitation, he said, "We stop the drops now. No more medication for Eli unless I say so. Effective immediately." He turned back to Valerie. His voice was low but serious. "I don't want a single drop of that stuff touching him again." Valerie nodded, relieved. She hadn't expected him to accept it so quickly, but the truth had spoken for itself. Andrew walked into the hallway toward Eli's room. Valerie followed quietly. They both stood over the crib, looking down at the boy. His chest rose and fell slowly. His fingers twitched slightly in his sleep. Andrew leaned down and carefully picked him up. Eli didn't wake, but nestled against his father's chest. "We're going to fix this," Andrew whispered into the baby's ear. "I promise you." Valerie stood nearby, watching the two of them. One broken man holding his silent son, and for the first time, a father who had opened his eyes to the truth. Her heart felt heavy but hopeful. Eli wasn't alone anymore. They sat together in the nursery for almost an hour. Andrew held Eli, rocking him gently. He asked quiet questions. "When did you first notice? Did anyone else see it?" And Valerie answered everyone. She told him about the exact reactions, about her hesitation to say anything sooner. Andrew didn't judge. He just listened. Then he sighed. "All this time, I thought he was lost to me," he said. "I thought he couldn't feel anything, couldn't see, couldn't respond. And now I realize, maybe I never really tried to see him." Valerie sat beside him. "You did what you thought was best," she said gently. "But now you have a chance to do better. That's what matters." Andrew nodded slowly. "No more blind trust," he said. "No more doctors unless we ask the questions ourselves." Valerie could see it clearly now. Something had shifted inside him. He wasn't just watching his son anymore. He was starting to fight for him. For the first time, Eli had a real chance. When they finally left the nursery, the hallway felt different. Not just quieter, but clearer. Like something heavy had been lifted. Valerie went to her room, but she didn't sleep right away. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her thoughts were full of moments. Eli blinking, saying, "Mommy," reaching out, smiling. And now Andrew had seen it too. She didn't know what would happen next. There were still questions, and the future was uncertain. But tonight, something had changed. Someone had finally believed her. Someone had finally looked past the surface and seen the truth. She lay down, pulled the blanket up to her chin, and whispered to herself, "He's not alone anymore." In the other room, Andrew still held Eli, not ready to let go. The baby stayed asleep in his arms, unaware of the decision that had just changed his life. And somewhere inside that small child, for the first time in a long time, something had been set free. Someone had chosen to see. Without the drops, everything started to change. It wasn't immediate, but day by day, small shifts began to show. On the first morning, Valerie opened the curtains wider than usual while Eli sat on his mat. He blinked quickly and turned his head, following the streaks of sunlight as they moved across the wall. It was the first time he had shown interest in something out of reach. Valerie stayed quiet, just watching. Later that day, she placed a small toy in front of him, a bright yellow duck with a red hat. She wiggled it side to side. Eli's eyes followed the movement. Then, without warning, he let out a quiet laugh. Not a full laugh, but a real reaction, a sharp exhale with a hint of joy. Valerie gasped, almost not believing it. The next day, they tried again with a different toy. Same result. His eyes tracked the motion. He blinked. He smiled. Every day, the baby who had once been silent seemed to come alive just a little more. Valerie started to design small visual games. She cut out bold shapes from colored paper, red circles, black triangles, bright blue stars, and glued them to cardboard. She used a flashlight to move light across the shapes. Eli stared, blinked, reached, sometimes slowly, sometimes quickly. Mirrors were next. She placed one on the floor beside him. At first, he didn't seem to notice. Then he looked at it, blinked at his own reflection, and touched the surface with his fingers. It wasn't always consistent. Some days he would look right away. Other days, it took more time. But the important thing was that he reacted. Valerie recorded short clips on her phone. She saved every moment, every smile, every blink, every glance. After a week, Andrew asked if he could watch. They sat together on the couch and Valerie showed him the videos. Andrew didn't speak much, but his expression said everything. His son was seeing. Maybe not perfectly, but enough. Enough to make them believe in something new. Andrew contacted a new specialist, someone who had no ties to the old doctor or prescriptions. A woman named Dr. Sanchez came to the house for a private evaluation. She was kind and direct. She spent over an hour observing Eli's responses to light, contrast, and motion. Valerie stayed nearby the entire time. Andrew sat across the room, nervous but silent. When the doctor finished, she turned to both of them and spoke clearly. Eli has partial vision, likely from birth. He's not fully blind. The drops he was receiving may have suppressed his visual response, but it's hard to say how much damage, if any, was caused. With proper therapy and light-based stimulation, he may continue to improve. Valerie closed her eyes, overwhelmed. Andrew looked down at his hands, guilt washing over his face. "I thought I lost him," he said quietly. Dr. Sanchez touched his shoulder. "You didn't. He's here now." Valerie looked at Eli, who was reaching for a red toy, and whispered to herself, "He always was." Andrew struggled with guilt. He thought about all the missed chances, the quiet rooms, the ignored signs, the time lost. He had trusted the wrong people. He had followed instructions blindly without asking enough questions. Valerie stayed close, not with judgment, but with calm support. Her presence helped him stay focused. Together, they made new routines. In the mornings, Valerie opened all the curtains so the light filled every room. In the afternoons, they used colorful toys to play. Andrew learned how to hold the mirror at the right angle, how to shift a toy slowly so Eli could follow it. Valerie taught him how to turn simple actions into visual games. And Eli responded. He babbled more, crawled faster, smiled wider. He began to push himself up with more strength. The house, once cold and quiet, started to feel different. It sounded different too, with new sounds, playful noises, small celebrations for every tiny improvement. Each bath became a fun session instead of just a routine. Valerie used colorful foam toys and gently splashed water near Eli's hands so he would reach. Andrew often sat nearby, holding towels and cheering softly when Eli smiled or laughed. After drying off, they'd walk near the big living room window, letting Eli sit with his legs stretched out on the rug. He would lean toward the light, blinking and smiling. Sometimes, Valerie would hold up objects and move them slowly in the light. Eli followed with his eyes. Sometimes, he reached out. One afternoon, he grabbed a shiny spoon she waved in front of him. He didn't just hold it, he turned it in his hand, studying the way the light bounced on its surface. Andrew took a picture and later printed it, placing it in a frame in his office. "Look what he sees now," he said. It was no longer just a hope. It was happening. Eli wasn't stuck in silence anymore. He was moving toward sound, toward light, toward life. In the weeks that followed, Valerie and Andrew continued building the new rhythm. They worked as a team, sometimes silently, sometimes laughing together as they watched Eli respond to something new. His world was growing, one small discovery at a time. They stopped calling it therapy and started calling it play. They didn't measure success by medical standards anymore. They celebrated movement, attention, reactions. Eli's path wouldn't be easy, but it was finally clear. He was not blind to the world. He had simply never been shown the right way to see it. And now, without the drops, without silence, he was beginning to take it all in. Valerie watched him crawling toward the window one morning, his hand reaching for a strip of sunlight. He paused, looked back at her and smiled. It wasn't just a reflex, it was recognition. Valerie smiled back. She knew what that look meant. He was learning, he was healing. The baby who once sat quietly in darkness was now moving toward the light, both physically and emotionally. Andrew sat at his desk, papers spread across the surface, his phone on speaker. A well-known law firm was on the line, and he wasn't wasting time. "I want to open a case against the doctor who treated my son," he said firmly. "His name is Raymond Kelser." The lawyer on the other end listened, took notes, and asked questions. Andrew explained everything: the false diagnosis, the eye drops, the revoked medical license. Then he mentioned Valerie. She had been the first to notice, the one who had suspected something was wrong with the medication. After the call ended, Andrew walked downstairs and found her in the playroom with Eli. "I need your help," he said. Valerie stood up, nervous. "What kind of help?" He handed her a notepad. "I need you to write down everything, from the beginning, every detail." Valerie sat down and began. She didn't skip a single thing, not the first blink, not the foam, not even the doubt. She wrote it all down because now it finally mattered. The lawyer scheduled a meeting at the mansion. Valerie sat in a chair beside Andrew, hands folded in her lap. She was nervous, but she answered every question with honesty. She explained the daily routines, how she had noticed Eli's behavior changing, and how she had discovered the outdated eye drops. The lawyer listened closely and recorded the entire session. "Your testimony is crucial," he told her. "You may have just uncovered something much bigger than one case." Within 2 weeks, the legal team had filed official charges. A formal investigation began. News spread quickly through legal and medical circles. Families who had once been quiet came forward. Some described similar treatments. Others shared their doubts and regrets. The story leaked to the press. Articles began to appear with headlines like "Housemaid discovers truth about supposedly blind baby" and "False diagnoses under fire." Valerie's name started to show up in reports. Journalists requested interviews. She declined everyone. "I'm not the story," she said to Andrew. "Eli is." But the world kept watching. Media vans parked outside the mansion. News stations repeated the same phrases. Breakthrough case. Blindness under question. A mother's instinct. From someone who wasn't his mother. Valerie avoided the cameras. She stuck to her routines. Bath time, toy games, walks near the window. Eli was doing better every day. His movements were quicker, his expressions clearer. She focused only on him. Andrew handled everything else. He gave one brief statement outside the gate, asking the press to respect Eli's privacy. But behind the scenes, he was furious. "They sold a lie," he told his lawyers. "They convinced us to accept a diagnosis that was never fully true." Valerie kept notes. She even saved the original bottle of drops as evidence. The investigation widened to include the pharmaceutical companies involved. It turned out they had ignored multiple warnings about the drug's effects on infants. What started as one case was turning into something national, and Valerie, quietly, without asking for it, became the one person everyone talked about, even though she kept saying nothing. The court hearings began months later. Andrew sat at the front, dressed in a dark suit. Valerie sat behind him, holding Eli in her lap. The baby played with a soft cloth, unaware of the tension in the room. Reporters filled the back rows, typing quickly on their laptops. The defense tried to claim that the treatment was standard, that side effects varied, but the evidence was clear. The drop formula suppressed vision response. The doctor had been warned multiple times and had failed to act. Valerie was called to the stand. She took a deep breath and spoke softly, clearly. "I was hired to clean," she said, "but I couldn't ignore what I saw. This baby wasn't blind. He just needed someone to look at him differently." Then Andrew took the stand. His voice was louder, full of emotion. "My son lived in darkness because of a lie," he said, "but this woman brought him back to the light, not with medicine, not with machines, but with her eyes, her heart, and her time." Dr. Raymond Kelser was found guilty of medical negligence and fraud. His license was permanently revoked. The pharmaceutical companies involved were fined and ordered to review all infant prescriptions. News of the verdict spread fast. Major outlets picked up the story. Talk shows discussed it. Experts debated how such a mistake had gone unnoticed for so long. Valerie, once invisible, was now called a hero. People wrote letters, some sent gifts. But she stayed quiet. She didn't want a spotlight. She still lived in the mansion, still took care of Eli, still followed the same routines. The only thing that changed was the look in Andrew's eyes, full of respect and gratitude. Eli was now officially recognized as a victim of malpractice. His medical records were corrected. Therapists from across the country offered help, but Valerie was still his favorite person. She was the one who played with him in the foam, who whispered his name, who listened. The world might have called her a symbol, but to Eli, she was just the one who saw him. The months after the trial felt calmer. The press moved on to new stories. The mansion returned to peace. Eli's progress continued. He was now crawling fast across the rugs, chasing colored balls. He responded to voices, recognized faces, and clapped his hands when he heard music. Andrew joined more often during playtime. He learned how to make Eli laugh. He even helped with bath time. Valerie watched quietly, never needing credit. One afternoon, as they sat near the window, Andrew looked at her and said, "You changed everything." Valerie shook her head. "He changed. I just didn't look away." The framed photo of Eli holding the shiny spoon was still in Andrew's office. It reminded him every day that miracles don't always come from doctors. Sometimes they come from people who pay attention. Eli had become a symbol of resilience. His name was mentioned in conferences and articles. But inside the house, he was just a baby. Happy, curious, loved. And Valerie, the quiet housemaid, remained the one who saw what no one else dared to see, not with fancy tools, but with love. Months had passed since the courtroom days, and everything in the house felt different now. Eli had changed so much that it was hard to believe he was once the quiet baby who never blinked, never smiled, and sat still for hours. Now he was full of energy. He crawled quickly from room to room, chasing after colorful toys. He laughed when Valerie made silly faces. He pointed to things, the red ball, the yellow spoon, the blue blanket, and babbled sounds that were becoming clearer each week. He wasn't speaking full sentences yet, but the difference was obvious. He was learning, reacting, living. Valerie continued her routines, but now everything had joy. Every bath was filled with splashes and giggles. Every meal ended with food on his cheeks and hands. Andrew spent more time downstairs, often joining them during playtime. Sometimes he just stood back and watched with a smile. It was as if the house had finally woken up. The cold silence was gone. The rooms were filled with life. One morning, a letter arrived. It was a formal invitation from a national children's foundation. The envelope had a golden seal, and inside was a message printed in large, friendly letters. They were hosting an award ceremony to celebrate children who had overcome difficult challenges. Eli had been chosen to receive a symbolic medal. Andrew read the letter twice, then looked at Valerie. "They want to honor him," he said, surprised. Valerie smiled softly, unsure what to say. "Do they know he's just a baby?" she asked. Andrew nodded. "They know, but they said his story touched thousands. They want to show the world that even the smallest ones can inspire change." A week later, the three of them flew to the event. It was held in a large, colorful community center filled with balloons, music, and laughter. Other children ran around in bright clothes, holding snacks and paper flags. Eli looked around curiously from Andrew's arms, pointing at the lights and clapping when he saw the stage. The ceremony began with short speeches from teachers, doctors, and parents. Each speaker shared a story about a child who had fought through illness, injury, or hardship. Eli's name was mentioned near the end. A video played on the screen showing photos from the mansion, the bath time, the mirror games, the foam on his cheeks. Then came footage from the court hearings and a short news clip that called him the baby who saw foam. The audience smiled and wiped their eyes. When the host walked on stage and called Eli's name, Andrew stood up with him in his arms. They walked to the stage, while Valerie stayed seated, clapping gently. The host handed Andrew a small golden medal with a blue ribbon. Eli reached for it immediately, smiling as it touched his fingers. The crowd applauded warmly. Then the host raised one hand and said, "There's one more person we must honor today, the one who saw the truth before anyone else did. Valerie, guardian of the light." She looked around confused. Andrew turned to her from the stage, stunned as well. The host smiled and continued. "This woman didn't have a title or a degree. She wasn't part of a medical team. She was just someone who paid attention, who noticed a blink, a sound, a change. And because of her, this boy's life was saved. Today we honor her as well." The room filled with applause. Valerie stood up slowly, her eyes filled with tears. She wasn't used to being in front of people. She never asked for attention. But now, every face in the room was turned toward her, not in judgment but in gratitude. She walked to the stage slowly, her hands shaking. When she reached Andrew and Eli, she looked at the baby. He smiled wide and reached out his arms. Then clear and strong, he said it. "Mommy." The word echoed through the room. Valerie's breath caught. The crowd stood and clapped louder. She held Eli close, overwhelmed. That word, "Mommy," now meant more than it ever had. It wasn't just something he had repeated in the bath or said by accident. It was full of meaning. It meant safety, comfort, connection. It meant that Valerie was no longer just a maid or a helper. She was someone Eli trusted, someone he saw. The audience stood in silence for a few seconds, moved by the moment. The host placed a second medal around Valerie's neck. This one had a silver ribbon. "For seeing what no one else saw," he said. Valerie didn't make a speech. She just whispered, "Thank you," and held Eli tightly. Andrew placed a hand on her shoulder. "You deserve this," he said softly. Valerie looked down at Eli, who had started chewing on the ribbon of his medal. She laughed through her tears. The moment was strange, big, and emotional, but somehow perfect. It wasn't about being in the spotlight. It was about being seen, and Eli had seen her in the most honest way possible. After the ceremony, they walked outside into the sunlight. Reporters tried to ask questions, but Andrew politely waved them off. Valerie carried Eli now, letting him rest his head on her shoulder. He was tired, but happy. His small hand clutched her shirt. As they reached the car, Andrew opened the door and smiled at her. "I think he meant it," he said. "When he said mommy." Valerie nodded, brushing Eli's hair with her fingers. "I know he did." They drove home quietly, all three of them deep in thought. The foundation sent them photos from the event, which Valerie placed in a small album in the nursery. That night, as Eli fell asleep in his crib, Valerie sat beside him for a while, just watching. He shifted in his sleep and let out a soft breath. Valerie smiled, knowing that everything had changed, not just for him, but for her. She helped Eli see, not just with his eyes, but with his heart. And finally, the world had seen her too. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.